Then let me just ask the auditorium, who actually thinks that the migration issue we have right now in Europe, which will not go away, which will impact our society and the economies we live in, is going to have a negative impact? How many of yours just think so?
Well, I would say in the short term, I think... Hello, my name is Katarina Hughes, by the way. I think in the short term it's probably going to be negative because they are being welcomed with open arms at the moment. But at some point it will become a nuisance because these refugees need to be taken care of in the long term. And even though Germany certainly needs migrants in the long term, they do not speak English, they do not speak German today. They are not skilled today. They still need to get education. They need to settle down. They need to live somewhere in the long term, not just in camps. It's okay in the summer now when the weather is warm, but they will need housing. And there already are issues around housing, that there is not enough new housing built in Germany to make sure that people with lower income who are born in Germany have somewhere to live. So in the long term, probably good. But in the short term, I think it's going to be a little problematic.
And what do you think the government needs to do in order to make it a sustainable influx of people that actually will sort out our demographic issues?
That's a very good question. I wish I knew. If I did, I would talk to the government. But what I would, this is perhaps not quite to the topic, but what I am surprised about is the lack of initiative of European governments or worldwide governments. We saw this coming several weeks ago. I saw this coming. If I saw this coming, then how come people who have the experience didn't know that we will have to deal with more refugees in Europe, and they will not stop in Hungary, even if they build a wall. It's just not going to stop. So I think what we need to deal with is look at not just a European solution, but we need to go to the countries where these refugees come from and try to help there. But of course, how do we do that?
Well, yeah. This is a very, very good question. I mean, I have my own opinion, but I'm not the star of the moment. It's here. What do you think?
I just would like to support the last comment what she made. Actually, where Europe and many developed countries, I will say, should have worked for many years. They have started that, supporting developing countries and poorly developed countries, not only with NGO initiatives, of social initiatives, but really, investing in normal all-day life, like also agriculture and everything, so that, who is, at the end of the day, who is willing to be a refugee for the rest of their life? Actually, we should take more initiatives. We should be really more, we should have an action plan developing to change the situation there. However, at present, it is really too late to discuss on that. So we have to react now.
But Srita, that would be a government meddling with the issues of another government.
No,
I mean, how can you imagine?
You offer help. You offer help because you offer support, but at the right time. Not now. I mean, now you can definitely start initiatives. However, there are many governments in Africa, for example, or many other countries who would have loved to have structured approach and help and support, but not today and tomorrow, but 10, 20 years back. This work should have already started, so that this situation, is not there today where it is. So I think you are not interfering, but you are supporting.
So, if I may, how about, and this is just an idea, based on other people's ideas, but perhaps we need a global body that looks at developments and tries to expect what's going to happen. We have the World Bank, we have the UNO. They are effective to some extent, but not completely. So do we need, and if I would say we do need a body that looks after these things and tries to see what is going to happen. But how do we form it? Who forms it? Is it another UNO? That's relatively ineffective. Is it the heads of state? Is it people who are politicians? Is it economists? Is it a mixture? Is it a mixture of panels like in the States we have for the courts, where you just take a sample of the population with no requirements for education or experience, so you have a good mixture? how do we find, what does the panel think, if I may ask a question in that case? What do you think that body should be? How should it consist? What should it consist of?
I totally agree with you. I think it's actually a body, but I think a body on migration is necessary. Of course, there is International Organization of Migrations, which is basically accounting simply for the population flows. But I would leave the current situation in Syria aside, because that's a discrete case of a war. I mean, you cannot, wars just break out, so there is not much you can do. But I think there is a fundamental issue of Africa and Europe. The two parts are very close to each other. The gap between the northern shore of the Mediterranean in terms of income to the southern has never been as high in history. This is historically without precedent. And particularly now with the total chaos in the Middle East, that gap has even increased. So I think actually, in my opinion, what Europe should have done, but Europe also preferred not to see that problem, because they like to do the ostrich policy. Well, if we really don't look, the problem will disappear. Actually, they need to really negotiate with Africa. Essentially, orderly transfer of population, which would be, in my opinion, quotas, with African countries and European countries, and the rest would not be accepted. So it is, in my opinion, like a two-tier solution, because on one hand you're very liberal, because definitely, the ratio between, I looked at sub-Saharan Africa to the European Union in 2000, I think 30 or 50, maybe 50, the ratio will be 3-1. I mean, this is unsustainable. You will have a population with incomes that are 1/10 of the European incomes, and there are 3 times as many. So something has to give. And I think it's better that it should be done, in my opinion, in an orderly fashion, to the extent it's possible, rather than having the situation now, next summer, could be 1 million people. There is no limit to that. You can just sit on a boat and come. And I'm leaving Syria aside, because that's a separate issue of war refugees. I'm talking about people from poor countries. And I think that something needs to be done about that, and for the U.S. as well, but I think it's not as dramatic, despite what Trump is now talking. I don't think, in my opinion, it's not as dramatic as it is here.
When you say something needs to be done, I mean, I grew up in the 70s, 80s, and Entwicklungshilfe was like the word. Okay, Entwicklungshilfe, where you basically development costs, where rich countries would transfer huge amounts of money to the poor countries, especially in Africa, but back then as well. $130 billion each year. That's like the latest data, apparently.
No,
something is kind of.
I meant on migration. I didn't mean.
But one goes hand in hand with the other, because if I help another country to develop their economies, of course their economies should be better, should reap then the middle class rising, reap economic growth, i.e. perhaps less of an opportunity where you find yourself you have to migrate or you have to run away from the country. So I think one feeds the other eventually, no? No,
I totally agree with that. I'm just thinking that on the European side, and I understand that, there is a fatigue of aid. So I don't see aid kind of dramatically going from 150 billion to 300. Just there is a fatigue. But I absolutely agree with you that, there are 2 tools. One tool is development in the countries. And the better these countries develop, the less would be immigration pressure. That's kind of obvious. And the other tool is, since this is unlikely to solve the problem, then you have to have, in my opinion, some kind of orderly transfer or orderly migration. So they actually, give a small example, it seems to me that if somebody is sitting in Mali and can actually expect to go to France, because you would also have to link people with, by language and so on, within 5 or 7 years, or his family, then he might actually accept that solution and then wait until his order comes, rather having him go to Libya now and sit on a boat and try to come to Spain. So that was my sort of reason. So
orderly migration, do I interpret it right, is like a proactive stance at this point?
Yes, and actually an agreement between the countries on the numbers of people. Obviously, if the country does not have that many people, if they have agreed that they would be 10,000 going out today, this year, but there are only 7,000, I don't see that as a problem.
Do you think, post the U.S. Big crisis in the 1920s, we had a huge migration issue there, and there was a lot of migrants coming into the U.S. Can we learn something from that? Because there, a lot of people actually did managed to settle and to live the American dream. Can we learn something there?
There are many examples. I don't know. I was thinking, for example, now because of the crisis, I thought of also, you remember in the 90s, more recent, like 1978, I believe, or 1979, with Cuban refugees coming in mass to Florida. And actually there are some studies how they have sort of been accepted and so on. But mind you, there was a very large Cuban population already then in Florida, in Miami. So they were not just coming, and I don't know, but I think there may be some examples historically of such migration movements, Vietnamese also, that one can actually learn, because it is quite a big movement of people.